And to Laurent Dareau, one of the most talented artists this gallery in 34 years has had the pleasure to work with. He flew in yesterday and he is here right now. Laurent was born and raised in Paris. He received his Master's of Painting from the National Superior Decorative Art School in Paris and his formal training from the National Fine Art School in Lyon. Laurent came to the United States in 2004 and he now lives and works in Florida and California. Among his many collectors are Sir Richard Branson. And now I would like to unveil...
I just wanted to thank you all for coming here. For me, it's a special event because, I was not really. First of all, I was raised really close to the house where Marquis de Lafayette was born, and I visited it like a long time ago, and I never thought I would be, celebrating any kind of event in the United States when I visited his house. I've done a lot of work around the United States, around the flag, I talked today about the 9/11 and so on. So I'm a big fan of the United States, and I really thank you a lot to celebrate the coming of the French boat and to try to find a way to get them closer from the French people. So thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Laurent Dareau. I'm a French native painter, and I come in the United States about 13 years ago now. So my story is pretty simple. I was a child born in France, so I started drawing comics because in France, where my hometown, where I was born and raised, I was born in Paris, but in my hometown there was no museum. So the access with art at that time, we had no internet, we had a few libraries but not a lot of books. So the access to the art world was pretty much restrained. There was not a lot of way for me to discover painters, famous painters. So until I was 15, 16, 17 years old, all I did was comic books. So when I was about 18 years old, my parents asked me to have a real job before going to art school, which was actually a pretty good thing. So I became an optometrist, an optician. So I used to make lenses and sell glasses and so on. But I was not really fascinated by that job. But it gave me a lot of good knowledge about techniques, about drafting, about industrial design, optical rules that eventually I used in my work as a painter. When I finished that school, I was about 20 years old, I decided to go to a French art school in Lyon, which is a city in the center of France. This school was really focusing on contemporary art, and for me as a comic book artist, it was really difficult to understand contemporary art when you arrive in a room and there's barely a bag of uncooked rice in the middle of the room and you have to say why it is art. It was really difficult for me to access and to understand this world. So I focused a lot on classical drawing, so I had a lot of nude models, live models, and I did a lot of that for 2 years. Contemporary art was still, after 2 years, was still something that was kind of strange to me. Then, at that time when I was in 20, 21, 22, the draft was mandatory in France. So I joined the army, what we call the army in France, for 1 year. And I was in the south of Paris for 1 year. And there I met a lot of Parisian people. And they told me, you have to come to Paris because Lyon is a small town. It's like, if you're in Chicago and someone tells you that Chicago is a small town, New York is the only town. So I decided to go to Paris, and I did the National Superior Art Decorative School, which is, the nickname of that school is Les Arts Déco. It's more of a classical training than the fine arts, the National Superior Fine Arts School. It's a lot of people, people there are trained to do a lot of design, architecture, so a lot of things that include the art into the life. It's not real artists as it is in the fine art school. Now my goal in that school was really to be trained as a classical painter. There was not a lot of students who were doing that. We were about 15. And I think it was one of the last classical studio, where we really worked as classical painters. So the problem of that is that most of us were stuck in 1905, pretty much, when Picasso and so on starting going in a way that art was different than Impressionism, or even earlier paintings like the Classicism and the old masters, the Italians, the Spanish, and so on. So it was interesting, but on the other hand, we were kind of insulated from the contemporary art world, which doesn't mean putting a bag of rice in the middle of the room, which means much more. Contemporary art produces a lot of amazing things. It's difficult for a young painter sometimes to get into that thing, because it's almost like throwing a skill away. It's almost like you're gifted, you work your skill a lot. It's a little bit like, okay, you play the piano, you train for 10 years playing the piano, and suddenly someone tells you don't need a piano anymore. All you can do is to take a microphone and a computer. In order to find yourself, you need to lose yourself at some point. And it's really difficult. So when I started when I finished school, right away I was enrolled in a gallery in Paris, and my work was kind of impressionistic. I would say it was about, I was not 1905 anymore, I was more like 1915, but I was still stuck in a way of thinking art and painting like the old way. So, you don't work from photos, you just work from life. If you don't have something in front of your eyes, you don't paint. And it's pretty restricting, because, of course, the mind can create its own images. So I did about 4 years like this, where I was making a pretty decent living, and I was, exhibiting pretty much all over the place, in France, in Paris, in London, in the south of France. And I was about 28, 29 years old when I started questioning my own understanding of what is painting. So I started looking more and more at the 1950s, at the 1960s, and the 70s, and so on. And so I started looking at the abstract expressionism, also at the German painters, the Italian painters, the French avant-garde, and so on. And I was fascinated by that. So for about 2 years, I threw away everything that was figuration in my work, which was pretty strange, because it's like when you look at the sky with clouds, and you try to imagine what's in the clouds, and you see elephants, you see faces, you see a lot of things. You let your imagination just create things. And it was pretty much the opposite. I was trying to paint and to have no reference at all on my paintings, like watching something that was not referring to anything. So as soon as I was seeing a face, an eye, a figure, I was going back to the work and erasing and destroying it, and so on. The whole thing lasted for about 2 years, and at the end I was lost. So the thing about losing yourself, the risk of that is that, of course, you need to lose yourself to find yourself. But the other problem is that by losing yourself, you can really lose yourself. So that means you lose even your own identity. You're trying to find something that is not you. And the thing is that art is about questions, I think. I mean by that art is questioning our own skills, our own perception of what we consider as art, because we have so much reference in what we do and what we think that it's difficult. For example, when I started to work on those ways of painting, I was always trying to refer to a painter. So I was always thinking of a painter, and by thinking of a painter, I was not new. I was not creating something new. I was not going in my own way. I was just going in the way of someone else. That's pretty much the same thing that happens in art school when you have students and they can pick up the teacher they're going to be with for a year. Usually the students pick up the teacher that corresponds, that matches their own questions, that their own fears. So they find a teacher, and instead of trying to answer their own questions, they just pick up the answer of the teacher. And so they became a copycat of the teacher. And that's the risk with the classical studio and so on, where all the painters start painting like the master, because the master brings his own knowledge, his own questions. And as a young artist, it's about fear. It's kind of interesting. Or you have two types of artists. You have on one side you have the autodidacts, the people who are self-taught, who don't have any kind of background or never go to school. Those ones, weirdly, sometimes they find themselves much more easily because the only thing they can find is themselves, because they don't have necessarily the conscious of the knowledge. And on the other side, you have classical trained painters. So it's difficult. I mean, let's say it's pretty much unthinkable to think of a musician, of an artist who release an album of classical music, then an album of rock music, then an album of pop music, of whatever. He needs to get into his own style. And by doing that, the question is he not losing a lot of skills and a lot of thought? I don't know, it just falls. So basically when I arrived in the United States, I was at the point, I decided to come into the United States for the reason that since 1950, since 1945, all the art scene has been with my own work. What I've tried to do over the last 10 years since I've been in the US. First of all, portraiture is always something I can go back to. Portraits, it's the other. It's my way to dedicate myself to someone, to something that is greater than me. I don't go to church, but I go to museum. Museums are my church. When I go to see a work by Rembrandt or Rothko, I'm not watching a simple piece of canvas. I'm watching something that is more important to me than that. I'm watching something that is a true place of belief, of faith. So when I do portraits, I think I'm trying to do that because I think that one of my problems as not an American is as a European is my lack of confidence. I think from what I've experienced over the last 10 years, 12 years in the United States, I've seen a lot of artists here with a lot of confidence. And the confidence is communicable. What I mean by that is that you can share your confidence with someone. If you arrive, if you have a show, and when people come to see the paintings, they ask you, what do you think about your work? If you say, you know what, the next one will be better, then people start questioning and saying, okay, I will wait for the next one. Now if you say, oh, this one is amazing, it's my best work ever, and you know, see it, watch it, it's great. Then people say, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. Now, the really sad thing is that as an artist, you're supposed to question your work, to go further, to be better, to become better. And the lack of confidence is actually an awareness of our impossibility to be God, because as artists, I think we try to compete with God. You know, that's why in some religion the representation is not allowed, because it's just God who is allowed to create images or sculptures. So it's difficult. So as a French artist, hopefully pretty soon an American artist, I need to learn how to be more confident about what I do. And it's not about being pretentious. I think it's more about being aware of my own qualities and stop questioning my own practice and feeling shameful about things because I always think I can be better. I always think I can do a better painting. I think it's why artists paint every day. It's almost like the next one is going to be better. Because if you think that the best painting you've ever done is the one you've just done, why would you do another one? It just, you know. So it's about repeating the same thing over and over again and adding a little bit at a time, just to try to reach a higher plane or higher. I used to have life models. Working with life models is a difficult experience because, once again, it's strange to think that someone's going to waste 10, 20, 50 hours of their time sitting in a chair for a painter. It's a big act of love. It's a big act of dedication. And I'm thankful to all the models in the world for doing that. I mean, some of them do it for the money, so that's something else. But the people who do that for free, it's a win. thing. It's really an act of love, of saying to the painter, I love your work, I love what you're doing. Now as a painter, to have someone give so much to yourself, sometimes it's overwhelming. Sometimes it's difficult to be able not to rush. Because, I mean, I used to work with live models a lot, and when I had the model in my studio, I was feeling embarrassed. First of all, I had to talk to that model because the silence can be really heavy, and I wanted to entertain the model. I wanted to be thankful. I wanted to say to the model, "Oh, you know what? I'm thankful for talk." And then my mind was going away because I was talking, the mouse was moving, and so on and so on. So working with live model is an extraordinary experience because the colors, even everything about the body is there. I mean, when you're with someone in a room, it's different when you're alone. So I remember that I read somewhere that Cézanne once said to his wife, "Stop moving. At least apples don't move." It was something. But anyway, so I start working from photos. The premise photos is that the colorimetry, the colors of photos, they use 3 colors to print photos: yellow, red, and blue, and black. But black is just to make the more white or more dark. When you do that, you work in a zone on the circle of the colors, which is reduced to a triangle. So after a while, I realized that I was not happy with photos. So now I work with a TV screen. When you go to a store that sells TV, do the experiment. You go there and you see all those giant TV screens. The colors are so vivid. And now they're releasing more and more HD TV and so on. So now it's really amazing. I have those TVs in my studio, and I have the model with me. And not only that, but I can get close to the model because I can do like enlarging a detail. Like I can pretty much put my nose like 5 inches away from the face of the model or the eye or things like this. So it's a great experience as well as a painter to be able to do that. Just for the record, Vermeer was working from photos, not from photos. He had an optical box. So painters have been using optical process to paint forever. In the 19th century, a lot of painters were working from photos. So it's not something new. It's been around for a long, long time. When it comes to storytelling, lately I've tried to do a series. I mean, I've always been questioning something as a painter. Do we tell stories, or is the painting itself, as a technique, the story? What I mean by that is that if you paint a bouquet of flowers, it's absolutely uninteresting, flowers. Now, the painting can be absolutely beautiful, but it's the painting itself that is beautiful. It's not what it talks about. Now, when you look at painters like Magritte or painters that are storytellers, even Rembrandt was telling stories, even Velázquez is telling stories in some of his paintings, and so you have some are portraits and some are scenes with 5 characters and so on. The problem we're facing, I mean I'm facing that, is what kind of story do I tell? So for me as a storyteller, I'm questioning, do I need to tell stories? Do I need to have a painting that says something? I've seen a lot. I look at a lot of painters today, and there's a lot of stories. And the problem of stories is if you tell a story, I think it's like poetry. Poetry is not storytelling. Poetry is just like a collage of words, and that makes something sound beautiful. The imagination that brings the poem is interesting. Now, once again, I always go back to the portrait because the portrait is its own thing. There's no storytelling. The only storytelling, I mean, for me, a good portrait is a mirror. So if you look at a good portrait, you look at yourself. You look at your own humanity. And I think that's what I found amazing when I go in beautiful museum when there's some beautiful portrait, is that the guy in front of me, it's me. It's not only and the weird thing is that if you look at the portrait of Velázquez, of Van Dyck, of even Lucien Freud, they are not technically perfect. Actually, those guys assume absolutely their lack of skills, because I think what makes them different is not their skills, it's their intelligence. is their own ability of questioning who they are and what they are. That means that I stop the portrait, not when it's done, it's never done. When I feel like the ball I'm pushing is just in balance at the top of the hill. And I think what I learned with the experience of doing so many portraits is the size of the hill is bigger, that's it. I mean, I'm still struggling the same. I'm still struggling as much than the same portrait, the first portrait I've ever done. It's still the same thing. Just now I know a little bit more, and I have sometimes I have some tricks. I know that when I work, there's some days I'm good, there's some days I'm not. And I hate the day when I'm not good. But I have to deal with them. And maybe I have some good days because I have some bad days. So it's always a balance, it's always that thing. So sometimes I work with, I don't do that anymore that much, but sometimes it has happened to me that I was working for hours and hours and hours on a portrait. I touch it and I ruined it, and I was never capable to find it back. And it has happened to me a couple of times. It doesn't happen that much anymore. Maybe it's about getting more experience, maybe it's about getting smarter or more patient. Now I know one thing. I know that whatever, if I spend the time, I will figure it out. When you're a young painter, when I was a young painter, no. After a couple of hours I was done. I could not stand for a long time. But now I learn how to do that. So now I'm going to talk about my experience with the Hermione. So about 6 months ago, 7 months ago, I was in Florida and I went to an event, and there was the president of the Friends of the Hermione and Lafayette of Florida. And I talked to them, and I participate to a lot of charity. You know, over the years, I've been given maybe 30 or 40 paintings to charities. And it's nice, it's a really nice experience. And it's nice to know that you can, that's the thing I learned in this country that we don't do that much in France. It's really nice to know that you're going to give for the children's hospital, that you're going to give for the dogs, for the blinds, things like this. It just makes me feel good. It's a little selfish, but you know, it's nice to feel good about something like this. So they asked me, so they were looking for painters not painters, but any kind of item they could sell for the association to raise money, to do fundraising. So I said, yeah, I can do a boat. You know, I've done a lot of landscapes, a lot of impressionistic style paintings when I was. But this boat, the idea of painting a boat is doing a portrait actually. Because this boat has a boat. This boat is someone. This boat is someone. It has a soul, and that's pretty strange. So for me, the Hermione, at the beginning when I started painting the Hermione, it was just a boat. It was just something floating on the ocean and so on. Now I went on the boat 2 days ago, and now this boat, and I don't know. I don't think this boat is going to disappear one day. Is it going to sink? Is it going to burn? Is it there for 5 million years? I don't know, but what's for sure, nobody's going to let it go, I hope so. As long as we people to raise money for it and to keep it in shape. So I did almost paintings of the boat, and those objects are part of our history, and they are not necessarily object of art, but they have that charge, that power. I think there's a life inside the object. I think people are trying to go back to that right now, and why? Because they want an object who has a life. And who do you work for? Rodin, and Michelangelo, I don't think they were working only for themselves. I think they have a higher vision of their work. And I think this century needs to be about that on an artistic level. I mean, we cannot just say, I want a giant pickup truck that does 5 miles per gallon just because I like it. We're all on the same boat. We're all on the same thing. We need to be aware of everything around. And this craziness about, we want new things all the time. And it's funny because we want new things, and on the other side, we want things that have a story and an history. So it's kind of a struggle. Art needs to be the light, how do you say that in English? I don't remember the name. The light on the shore. It's, you know, I think my work, talking about the Amiens, my portraiture and so on, I would try to make people understand that it's about you know, it's like, it's not because there's a big star in a movie that the movie is good. I think it's really about quality. It's about depth. It's about what is good, and it's not because it's worth a lot of dollars, or it's because a lot of people sees it, or a lot of people give the accreditation that it's necessarily something where we need to.